China is expanding testing for its digital currency known as Digital Currency Electronic Payment, or DECP, to include the Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei region, the Yangtze River Delta, the Greater Bay Area, and the pilot areas in central and western regions where conditions permit. Well, first released for trial operations in April, how has the digital yuan fared so far? What is the second round of testing intended to prove? Will the DCEP help the internationalization of the RMB? And if so, could it become an alternative to the US dollar? To talk about these issues, I'm joined by Mr. Liu Zhiqin, Senior Fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University, Michael Son, Co-Director of FISF FinTech Research Center at Fudan University, Anthony Chen, former Chase Chief Economist at JP Morgan, and Steve Keen, Honorary Professor at University College in London and Distinguished Research Fellow at the Institute for Strategy, Resilience and Security. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhu Yue. So let me start with you, Mr. Liu. China began the trial run of this digital currency, what we call DCEP, earlier this year. What is the scope and of the trial, and what does it aim to prove?
I think we have to say the scope and the scale of this experiment is not so large as we hope, because this is only in the very initial stage of the utilization of the DCEP in China, beginning from this year in real practice. That's why there's all this DCEP could be at the moment in the special areas for cities and for areas that in small business places like a restaurant or like some small seller, retailer store, the skill scope is so very, very limited. And also the scope of the usage is only for the payment itself, so it cannot be used for any other transfer or other money transportation in the real sense. But at the moment, all things are in the initial stage. And for different purposes, but the main purpose is that China tried to begin this experiment to gather more experiences in dealing, in handling, and in solving all the problems that could emerge from the DCEP. So also we can show something that to the whole world outside of China. Of course, we have some economic purposes that we can talk later on.
And Michael, actually the trial only began in April 2020, still in the midst of a pandemic, and now in August they want to expand the use. What do you make of the pace?
Well, I think it's accelerated. I think post-COVID and also with some of the geopolitical tensions, now there's a much expanded scope. It's to all essentially the prosperous and wealthiest areas in the country. I've heard over 28 locations and covering the Yangtze River and Guangdong province. And also it's moving beyond just, I would say, the retail. It used to be focused on just payments in areas, for example, McDonald's and Starbucks. And it's been expanded to major e-commerce platforms like Meituan and Didi and Bilibili, which is a streaming platform. So I see a lot of activity to expand the scope. Notably for the last three companies I mentioned, they have a very large user base, over 1 billion people, and also have users that expand into international territory. So we see a strategy here to actually expand the scope of that. Also, we are also seeing commercial to commercial activity. So the banks are doing more industrial scale transactions, I think in preparation to stress test this for general use in the general economy.
And Anthony, actually the Chinese digital currency has been in the making for quite some time. What is your thinking on the timing of its launch and its strategic goal here?
Well, I think it's opportune time to do this, because this is a situation where we have a global pandemic, and we want to make things a lot more efficient, get people excited. Remember, there are many central banks around the world that have ambitions to have a digital currency, but China, BOC, is one of the early adopters of this technology. So I think it's very exciting. It's still early days, and so we cannot expect this to be completely functional in the early days, but compared to other central banks around the world, China appears to be leaps and bounds ahead of all other central banks, and many central banks will learn from the Chinese experience. So I think it's very exciting, and we should limit our expectations as to how quickly it can go, but certainly it's been a project that's been in the making for at least 6 years, and I think that in the next 5 years, we're all going to be amazed as to how much takes place and how much is accomplished.
And Mr. Liu, how quickly is it going for Chinese? Can average consumers using this currency to buy anything in their payment? And what has been the response?
I mean that in the near future that all these Chinese users and the customers can get used to use this DCEP, but DCEP at the moment is not largely promoted or recommended to the public use. But for some person that who are really interested to do it, they can already do it. As we know that we have already WeChat payment, we have Alipay and different similar as this DCEP. But if we have the app in our mobile phone, so the two mobile phones can be put together just to touch with each other, I think the transaction is already finished. So that's why we see that the normal people, the customers can get used to do it, because the people here in China are very curiously, very fresh-oriented. They also want to learn something new, so especially for the electronic payment in the digital currencies. So this form will be very attractive for many young people and also for some aging people. They already have show their great interest in doing so. So I hope that this market will be slowly exploded and also enlarged in the near future. Can show really a good example to the outside of the world, you see.
So is this also the reason why they have chosen the economically developed areas like the Greater Bay Area, Beijing-Tianjin, and the Yangtze River Delta? But it also said some western and central regions where conditions permit. What kind of conditions does it imply?
I mean, the preconditions, I think, are very important in two areas. One is the technical or technology infrastructure is really well managed and well established, because of this digital currency transfer should be needed in security and also in transparent, in a very tough system management. So the infrastructure in the technological field must be first built up. And secondly, also the people that the professional people in the banking or in the other areas that especially in charge of the e-commerce business, they should be well educated, well trained to handle such transactions, because this is also very new, not only for the normal users, but also for those that who are really regarded themselves as professionals or experts in this field. But for such, DCEP is something new. As we know that in China we have already started 6 years before to learn to manage it, to build up the team, build up the philosophy, and also some law system. But actually in practice we need a lot of work and efforts to be done.
And Michael, we know there are some cryptocurrencies in use, such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and even Facebook's plan Libra. What is the difference between the Chinese national digital currency DCEP with those versions?
Well, I think Bitcoin, which was basically invented about 10 years ago, was really a groundbreaking technology. Basically, they created, a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto created this new blockchain concept, which allows the decentralization consensus mechanism so that you don't need a centralized authority in order to do the ledger transactions to maintain a system. So they created this digital value system called Bitcoin, and it's completely decentralized. We call it a public or permissionless blockchain. Anybody can participate in this network without any sort of permission and transact in it. So by definition, this is outside of a centralized system. So governments or banks or centralized authorities do not have the ability to manipulate the system.
But that's not a currency
that
in nature, because we can't pay with those bitcoins to buy things or make transactions, can we?
Yes, you can. A definition of a currency, there are three major attributes. One is a store of value, one is a medium of exchange, one is the unit of account. Bitcoin arguably satisfies a few of these. The medium of exchange, because of the volatility, is something that's not so sure. So people define Bitcoin as primarily a store of value, so digital gold, right? And to answer your question, Libra, on the other hand, is which is what Facebook is using as a digital currency, is involved with a permission blockchain. So we have people who actually maintain the system. They're specially chosen to be able to participate in that. And the original instantiation was a basket of currencies. Recently, Libra 2 was announced, and this removed the basket concept and our individual asset-backed currencies. And then the DCEP is a totally different beast. It's not centralized. It's not decentralized at all. Actually, it's a two-tier system. It's a completely centralized system in the first tier to allow the People's Bank of China to transmit value to other intermediary banks. And there's a secondary system to transmit the DCEP payments to the general public. And that secondary layer could potentially be blockchain or decentralized as well.
Mm-hmm. Anthony, what do you make of the urges of different institutions? There are central banks trying to do this, Facebook at a commercial company, and like Bitcoin, that's basically a group of people who base their idea on blockchain. They all want to do it electronically. Why there is such strong desire to move that way?
Well, I think the primary reason behind all that is to make it convenient, make it secure, and make it efficient. I think the big difference between the DCEP and these other currencies that you've mentioned, like Bitcoin and others, is that you don't have the same anonymous participation that you do with these other currencies. When you make a transaction, the Central Bank of China will have complete transparency and complete information on that transaction, which obviously has some benefits. You can certainly protect yourself against fraud. You can protect the country against money laundering. Many benefits. But at the same time, it also allows the user to feel comfortable and secure that their transaction has full transparency. And if someone tries to commit fraud, then the government can actually step in. Remember, it's a two-layer approach. You have the central bank and you have the commercial banks, and you potentially are using blockchain technology, but it doesn't have the anonymous features of many of the other cryptocurrencies that are actually promoted on that basis. This currency does not, and on top of that, it has a stable value. Unlike Bitcoin, which can fluctuate in value, this currency will basically be in parallel to the actual stable RMB currency, and the value will not fluctuate over time. So you also feel secure with the value of the currency, which you cannot feel with many of the other cryptocurrencies.
And earlier you said many countries have been considering to have their own a national e-currency. And the Bank of America recently expressed fears that the digital yuan could challenge the US dollar as the currency of choice. Do you share a similar concern? What will a digital currency do to renminbi?
I think that it's early days to be concerned about that threat, because remember, for a currency to basically be the supreme currency or the reserve currency of the world, you have to have zero capital controls. You have to have the currency basically being have its value set in foreign exchange markets freely. And so far, although that may be the goal of the Chinese government for the RMB, the renminbi, that is not the case. You still see some capital controls. You still see the inability to move the Chinese currency freely into other countries. And so those conditions have to be met. Not to say they won't be met at some point in the future, but I think it's early days before we can start to entertain the risk or even the possibility that the Chinese currency is going to completely overtake. Is it going to make using the renminbi a lot easier and perhaps increase its popularity? Absolutely. But that is something that we really have to talk about perhaps later on when these other conditions are relaxed. And when they do, then at that point, I think the RMB poses a bigger threat to the U.S. dollar.
And the reason I ask this question is because of the big backdrop, of course, the deterioration between U.S. and China economically and financially. And some people say this might be a good way of circumventing the possible U.S. banking sanctions on China. Could DCEP provide another channel for people to access Chinese currency and better use of it when the U.S. is sanctioning China financially?
I have no doubt that that is exactly the case, but that's a different question than saying whether the RMB will become the international reserve currency of the world. And so I think initially for those countries that want to participate in China and can go and use this DCEP infrastructure, it will make life a lot easier for those countries. But it still does not create the conditions for the Chinese currency to pose a real threat to the reserve currency of choice, which is the U.S. dollar. I think that will come later on, and I think that that's the power of China to make those conditions occur sooner rather than later. It's up to China, not up to the rest of the world at this stage.
All right, thank you, Anthony. And Mr. Liu, a bigger question is probably if DCEP become more popular and even a dollar alternative, what it will do to help China's economy?
I think this question is quite essential and very interesting to all people in China who are considering to utilize the DCEP. Because DCEP is an alternative of the payment. It's not an alternative of the banknote of the traditional Chinese currency. Both currencies are in legal position, have the same reputation in the market. So this is very important. That's why that we see the greater importance to support, to stimulate, to promote China's economy in a further and more free way for development. Because DCEP can make the business transactions more easier, more confidential, and more effective. That could help that all the business group, businessmen, and all companies to do more effective business transactions, including domestic market and also international market. As we know, China is becoming already the largest trading country in the world. So we need a lot of means and measures that to safeguard the transportation and also our money transfer. So DCEP is one of the best choice for China to follow these measures and also to safeguard the security of our economy. So in this way that it will help China's economy in a very safe way. I should say DCEP is another electronic engine for China's economy's further development. We can see a lot of very positive results in the time to come.
We have Steve Kin on the line, honorary professor from UCL. And Steve, what is your take on China's digital currency on its economy?
I think it's an extremely good idea. I've been in favour of digital currencies, central bank digital currencies, for quite some time. The basic reason being that we have a mixed fiat and credit system in our economy. The government creates fiat money, the private banks create credit money, and every large major crisis in capitalism's history has been caused by the credit side rather than the fiat side. That breaks down transactions, and transactions are the lifeblood of any economy. So a central bank digital currency makes it possible to maintain transactions even if there is a crisis in the credit system. So I applaud China for bringing this initiative forward.
And it can do a lot of job to help the government and our system to avoid any possible money laundering and corruption. So this is another way to safeguard and promote China's economy. That means that China is facing great challenges for risk management and risk control in the future, according to the turbulence situation in the world. So that's why I think DCEP is a very good positive for China's economy now.
And Michael, I know you are a finance expert, but there are some practical questions I want you to tackle. Well, we have already electronic payment systems like WeChat Pay, Alipay, existing in China, actually quite prevalent in China. What does DCEP offer that those things cannot?
Well, in China is a very unique situation. As you mentioned, there's a duopoly. Alipay and WeChat take over 95% of the market in terms of electronic payments. This is not necessarily a good thing. Actually, I think within the country there is debate about whether or not there's too much power in the hands of these tech companies, right? DCEP sort of levels out the playing field, or at least provides an alternative to give banks, for example, the ability to actually transact and the technologies to provide their customers with an alternative. That's one, right? Second, we have to remind ourselves that technically, even though Alibaba seems like a very stable company, there is the possibility that it could default because it's not really asset-backed the same way, let's say, a sovereign currency is. So right. The PBOC can guarantee the fiat. Yeah.
And as you said,
and also I think beyond that.
Go ahead.
Beyond that, I think we also have to consider that we're just talking about payment right now, but the potential for the DCP and the technology is as programmable money. So instead of just having a payment functionality, which is a traditional thing, you can imagine programming functionality into money that is very useful. So for example, in the current economic crisis, there's been lots of bailout money. And a lot of that bailout money is actually just given to the banks and given to, in China's case, the state-owned enterprise. That money may not be efficiently used to stimulate the economy because the money is used for things like stock buybacks in the States, right? For example, in the United States, the airline industry is asking for $50 billion in bailout. And it happens to be roughly the amount that they spent in stock buybacks since the original crisis from 2008. Right. So with a programmable money, you can imagine putting any sort of functionality in it. You can limit the use, and you can also directly transmit that money to the people who need it the most. So for example, the SMEs and the financially excluded, the most fragile people in the economy, with the offline businesses, real stimulus. Now we have a mechanism for the People's Bank of China to directly stimulate the economy at that fine granularity and with a more refined fiscal policy.
You also mentioned that digital currency makes sense in time of crises or natural disasters. But what about the security and privacy of those users? Can I lose money more easily with a digital wallet? And will my information be lost more easily because of the use?
That certainly is the case with private wallets. And there's many, many stories of people being scammed with a private wallet or using a particular exchange which then gets broken into and they lose their money. This is a central bank digital currency using similar blockchain-style technology for security of the transactions, but there's only one ledger. It's maintained by the central bank and the account is held at the central bank. So it doesn't have the dangers of being broken into in the same sense or fraud wiped out as a private exchange does. And as the previous speaker mentioned, the money can be repurposed. You could use this for a universal basic income. You could use it for carbon credits, which is one system I'd like to see implemented to bring climate change under control. So it's a great form of flexibility for the central bank, and it is much, much more secure for the public than private blockchain technologies.
And another thing is that people worry digital currency probably is easier to be overused, causing inflation, because the decision makers might be tempted to print more money digitally. Well, look how successful they've been at causing inflation for the last 20 years. It's amusing. This is a case of going back and fighting the last war. Inflation was crushed in the West in about 1980 to 82. It's been falling ever since, and deflation is the real problem the global economy faces right now. So I'd rather look at the promises for this of reversing deflation, and a major system, again, it could be used for my idea of a modern debt jubilee as a way of cancelling private debt, which is a major factor behind the low levels of inflation today. And we have also collected some ideas from social media users on China's new digital currency. Let's take a look at what some of them have been saying. BTC Shark official said the principal in DCEP Research Institute said considering that the currency is limited to pilots, it won't be used in large quantities and fully promoted. In short term, the currency circulation rate will also maintain normal levels, therefore it will not cause inflation. That is on the presumption that it won't be used widely in the short time frame. But what is the time frame for the use of this currency, Mr. Liu? When it will be used all over the country?
I think it will take some years to follow up, because we need two phases to finish all these preparations. One is that how to get the people that used to use this money, DCEP, because this is not easy to make really 100% in the public. We need a lot of time and efforts to do it. And secondly, we should know that for the whole country, especially in the western areas, as we already discussed, we need this technological infrastructure build up, and secondly, we need a professional team for all these operations. And third, at the moment, I should say that the market is the most important thing. When the market conditions are already mature, that in good time, in the right time, so we can do it all over the country. But I prefer to have the similar as now it is, that we prefer to do it step by step, one area to another area, from the one advanced province to another province. We cannot overlap all these areas and the regions in the country to do the DCEP. Okay. That will have chaos.
All right. On that note, we have to wrap up the program. Thank you, Mr. Liu. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Michael. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.